We're Charlie and Leanne, a couple from California who left our cushy suburban life to spend the next several years cruising around the Pacific Ocean on our boat, Juliet. And our little dog, too. In our last episode, I gave a talk at the monthly Women Who Sail meeting in which I shared stories of our cruising life. I also related the story of my assault in Zihuatanejo and shared self-defense tips, which allowed me to escape that incident unhurt.
We're underway from Caleta de Campos to Manzanillo area. I think we're going to head to the Las Hadas Resort and anchor in front of that, like we did on the way down. We left this morning at about 9:30. We've been motoring for a good chunk of it. We sailed for a couple of hours, motor sailed for another couple of hours. Now we're motoring again because we have less than 5 knots of wind. It's been a nice day. We saw some whales, a lot of turtles, one boat. It's been pretty low traffic here, and we're just a few miles off the coast. You can see coast right off our starboard side. Anyway, it's been a good day, but it is an overnighter. It'll be getting dark in about a half hour, and then by first thing in the morning we should be right into Manzanillo Bay.
If only that had happened. As we enjoyed a magnificent sunset at sea, neither one of us had a clue that our greatest challenge as cruisers was about to hit us. Hard.
Never a dull moment cruising. I had just given Charlie his bowl of beans and tortillas to eat, and we start hearing this beeping that we didn't recognize. Looked on the panel where the engine indicators are, and it says low oil pressure. So he's down below checking the oil. Guess we'll find out what's going on. We had to turn the engine off, and we're just bobbing out here. We're still, we're a couple of hours outside of Cabeza Negro if we decide we want to drop anchor, although it would mean dropping anchor in the dark. And our intent was to keep on going through the night and go all the way to Las Hadas, and we would arrive in the morning, but we'll just have to see what's going on, if we can even use the motor. I don't think there's enough wind. Well, there's 8 knots of wind. Hard to say if we'd be able to sail, but I mean, we'd have to get some forward motion, so let's see what happens.
Charlie immediately dug into the engine compartment, but could not figure it out. We decided not to go into Cabeza Negra, as it's not a place you would be able to find any services or assistance. So in light winds, we raised the sails and spent a long, sleepless night trimming them as we tried to make some progress.
Last night, on our way from Caleta de Campos to Las Hadas in Manzanillo, we ran into a problem. We were powering with the engine. We had been running it for about 8 hours, and we got a low oil pressure light. We shut down the engine. I went down and checked the oil, and the dipstick was dry. Where all the oil went, I don't know. This engine it consumes very little oil. Normally, when I check the dipstick, it's right at the full mark until the next oil change. And last time I checked it, it was full. I did not check it yesterday morning before we left. I had checked it not too long before, and it was fine. So I'm not sure what happened. I looked underneath the engine where we have a drip pan. I didn't see any accumulated oil. I didn't see any excessive oil on the engine. There was some coming out the overflow blow-by tube. So I'm not sure. I had a gallon and 1 quart of oil. I poured it in the engine, and I saw a little bit show up in the dipstick, so it's not enough to run the engine. Consequently, we're under sail. We're headed to either Manzanillo or Bar de Navidad, depending on which one will be more likely to have diesel oil and some services if needed. So I haven't yet looked at it during the day. I'm about to do that now, go down and see if I can diagnose this. Hopefully it's something simple, but I'm a little perplexed. back of the transom where the exhaust is doesn't look unusual. There's no oil remnants. I've got a pretty acute nose when it comes to engine smells. The difference between diesel, fuel, and oil. I did not smell any burning oil last night. So, yeah, I'm not sure what's going on, but we'll take a look and see.
So last night was not a lot of fun. Neither one of us got any sleep, and maybe an hour total each. Because we can't run the motor, we've got to sail, hoping to get somewhere. The problem is last night the wind kept dying, and it was moving around a lot and coming from the wrong direction. So we ended up making pretty much no progress over the course of the entire night. We spent most of the night just kind of bobbing around, trying to keep the sails full when we could, and also dodging the container ships that move along here. So yeah, kind of a rough night, but we're fine. These things happen. That's what it takes to be a cruiser, is to be able to deal with these adverse situations that come up. I've got plenty of food on board. I did a big provisioning right before we left Zihuatanejo. So, I've got more than enough food. Might take us a couple of days to get somewhere, depending on whether we decide to go to Manzanillo or Barra. We have enough wind right now to be moving, and it's coming from the right direction, to be moving forward along the rum line if we want to go to Manzanillo. We're not bobbing around anymore, but we are moving very slowly. That's sailing. Anyway, we'll be fine. Okay, so there's no oil in the coolant. That's good. And there's no standing oil.
No standing oil in the pan. There was oil here.
Wait, here.
Back on the transmission. It had a sheet of oil on it. And what that came from, I'm sure, is this blow-by hose, which, when there's excessive pressure, it blows out the hot air with oil in it through this, and some of it will get sucked into the air cleaner, some of it will drip down and here. And because I ran the engine at high RPMs for about 5 minutes per the operating manual to help clear it out.
That's probably what happened.
Yeah.
But you, according to what we see now, you lost at least a gallon.
Well, that's what's weird. Last night when I checked the dipstick, the only oil I saw, it was completely dry. I put a gallon of oil in here, checked it a few minutes later, and the oil level came up to here. All I carry is a gallon of spare oil, so I couldn't put in anymore, and that's not enough to run the engine. But we check it now, and the oil level is right where it should be.
So it's like it disappeared last night after you poured it in, and then it just magically reappeared. Where was it when you couldn't see it on the dipstick? Did you just not wait long enough for it to show up or something? I don't know.
I don't know. All I can guess is the oil level was a bit low. Maybe there was some kind of a blockage or something. And then when I put the oil in last night, it filled it up to where it needs to be. Maybe I just didn't wait long enough to check it. On the way back to La Paz last season, we noticed our oil pressure gauge was a little bit low. When I got to La Paz, we changed the oil and filter. It was still a little bit low. I had a mechanic come and check the oil pressure sending unit, and it seemed okay. With the test gauge, it was okay. We put a new sending unit on, and we get the same reading. So the more I think about it, the more I think of a likely trigger for what happened was last night, I think an hour or two before we got the alarm, I had dropped the throttle down to about 1800 RPM. We normally cruise at about 2400 RPM. And 1800 is something we've never done before, but we had to do that because we were scheduled to get into the anchorage at about 3 o'clock in the morning and we wanted to slow down. But because there seems to be a current pushing us at our normal cruising speed, we were going too fast. We were going 6.8, 7.5 knots. So I dropped the throttle down to about 1800 RPM, and then that's when we got the alarm. And I've never done that before, but maybe with a low RPM there wasn't enough oil pressure to circulate the oil properly, and maybe it accumulated someplace where it normally doesn't and triggered the alarm. Why, when I checked the dipstick, it was empty at first. I'm still confused. I don't understand how that could have happened. We're gonna try and sail into our destination, get real close before I start up the engine. I don't want to risk there being an issue and doing damage out here.
That was the plan anyway, until the wind started disappearing and the sails began to flog. And that's just not healthy for the rigging, not to mention getting anywhere. At this point, we were going so slow, it would have taken us a week to get to Las Hadas. At the same time, we were close enough to the big shipping ports that we were beginning to see numerous large container ships heading towards us.
There's a very busy shipping port near here called Lazaro Cardenas, and that means that there are a lot of large container ships going between there and Manzanillo. So we've been kind of dodging container ships, cargo ships all night, and just now, in fact, a huge one is passing behind us, and we're, obviously we can't go very fast. We've got very little wind. We're lucky if we do 2 knots, so there's not much we can do to get out of their way. Oftentimes they won't alter their course, and it's up to us to dodge them. This guy, the one that's right behind us now, he did alter his course. But then he's gonna be a good mile away from us when he passes us, but he just tooted his horn really loud. So we're trying to figure out, was that just a courtesy toot, or is he trying to, get our attention? We don't know. Anyway, yeah, dodging cargo ships. Lots of fun.
Finally, the wind kicked up a bit and clocked around behind us to the point where we thought we could get some movement if we launched the spinnaker. So Charlie headed up to the foredeck to rig it. There it goes. Woohoo! But that only lasted about 2 hours before the wind began to die again and the sails to flog. Even the spinnaker wasn't helping. So we had a tough decision to make. Try to start the engine and hope that the oil pressure doesn't bottom out again, or keep bobbing and hope that the wind picks up and we don't get creamed by a container ship. We decided on the former. We found just enough oil on board to get the oil pressure back into the normal range, so we furled the sails and powered up.
Well, it's been a hell of a day. A lot of flogging with no wind. We were afraid to start the motor. We did some more diagnostics. We went ahead and started it, got another alarm after about 40 minutes. Stopped, flogged again because no wind, and now we're worried about getting stuck. We're closer to shore. We don't want to get blown, into land, and we're close to a shipping lane. We don't want to get creamed by a container ship. So we started up the motor again. So far, no alarm. We're just rushing into Manzanillo, and we're going to quickly get in there as quick as we can. We have a good hour still to go, hoping that everything holds out and we don't get another alarm.
This is not how I like to operate, but given the circumstances, it just seemed to make sense to try and make an effort to get into the anchorage. And so far it seems to be working. The oil pressure gauge looks normal, and the alarm has not gone off, so hopefully it's just a faulty sending unit, and everything's okay.
The sun is dropping, which is a bummer because we still have probably an hour before we get to drop anchor, and we don't like dropping anchor in the dark. but maybe there will still be some limited light, twilight. So, oh yeah, and there's a full moon too, so that will help.
We could see Manzanillo ahead of us, but would we make it? As the sun dropped lower into a red haze, things were feeling dire. We had no idea if the motor would hold out until we got there. If it died again, we could find ourselves drifting ashore. Once the sun set and we entered the bay, things got even scarier. We had to cross a narrow ship lane where these enormous container ships were constantly entering and leaving the bay, doing 10 to 15 knots. With our motor moving us at 6 knots, it would take us about 15 minutes to get across it, and we would have enough speed to avoid the ships. But if it died in that lane, we would be in serious trouble. These ships can't avoid us if we stop in the lane. They are going fast, and they take miles to slow down. And for the record, I'm not exaggerating or over-dramatizing. This was a very dangerous situation, but we felt we had no choice but to shoot across it while our motor was running. We'd hoped to arrive at the anchorage while there was still some twilight in the sky so we could see well enough to anchor, but obviously that didn't happen. It was full night. The good news was that the full moon was high in the sky, which hopefully would light things well enough for us to see. The engine did not die. We did not get creamed by a ship. We managed to drop anchor in the dark. We survived our greatest challenge so far as cruisers. Now that we're safe, let's take a look at where we are. Las Hadas is a resort and marina located in the northwestern corner of Bahia Manzanillo. The marina itself is not a good option for cruising boats as it's very small and the slips are mostly private, so most cruising boats anchor just in front of the resort, which is a pretty nice place to be. The entire area has a distinctly Mediterranean feel, with jumbles of whitewashed buildings tumbling down steep hills to the bright blue sea. The resort itself is gorgeous to look at, although we never did go inside to see how nice it is. This is actually the place where the movie 10 with Bo Derek and Dudley Moore was filmed, so it has quite a bit of international renown. Inside the marina, there's a convenient dinghy dock, and along the walkway there are a few really nice restaurants, a couple of stores, and even a gelato shop. Our friends Scott and Kathy from the sailboat Sea Bella were there at the same time, along with a few other boats we know, so we took full advantage of the amenities. There's also a shipwreck right on the beach. Apparently this sailboat got blown ashore last season during a hurricane, and its salvage has been tied up in some legal wrangling, and that's all we know about it. Does put things in perspective though, doesn't it? This could have been us. Beyond Las Hadas to the east is the large city and port of Manzanillo, where container ships come and go on the regular. Fortunately, Las Hadas, located so deep into the massive bay of Manzanillo, is super calm and flat, which sure helped with Charlie spending so much time with his head down in the engine compartment. And let's not forget Bubba, who was a champ through all the drama. Now that we're safe, he wanted to get back into his normal routine, which means at 4:30 sharp, he's sitting in front of me, making sure I don't forget that it's dinner time.
Is there something you need? Is there something you want? Are you feeling impatient? Is there something that you think I should be doing? You're just going to sit there and stare at me until I do it?
So it turns out none of our theories were correct.
This is the oil cooler, and the problem that we had was this upper chamber here developed a leak, and the leak was allowing oil to go into the seawater chamber and out the exhaust. So the way this thing works is seawater comes in here, goes through here, into here, and out here into the engine. Oil from the engine comes from the oil pump into here, and it goes around tubes that are inside this chamber which cool the oil, and then the oil comes back through here, again through tubes, and out here back down to the engine where it goes through the filter and the rest of the engine. And so when the leak occurred and the engine was running, the higher oil pressure allowed the oil to go out the seawater cooling circuit and leave the engine. And that drained the oil level to the point where the alarm went off, and then we shut down the engine. So a mechanic here in the marina took this oil cooler to a repair shop, and they installed a whole new upper chamber. So this upper chamber is new. It's all been brazed or welded back together, the right dimensions. So we're going to go and install this on the engine, and then run the engine a few times, flush the oil, put in new filters, just make sure everything's nice and clean. And then hopefully by next week, this time next week, we'll get a brand new oil cooler, remove this, put in the new one with new washers and hoses, and then we'll be ready to go. Okay, so the new oil cooler, the rebuilt oil cooler is installed, all the plumbing's connected, water lines, oil lines. I checked everything, it looks good. The low pressure alarm is wired up and the pressure gauge is wired up. I've got the air filter off because we had fuel, a little bit of diesel fuel in the crankcase. There could be a runaway situation, so if that happens, I'll just snuff out the air with this thing here. This is the air intake. I've cranked the motor over for about 10 seconds total, two rounds of 5 seconds, to circulate any oil into the filter and get it into the chamber. This is the moment of truth. Let's start the motor and see what happens. So if you want to go up and turn on the key, I will crank it from our crank down here, and we'll see what happens. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Woo! It started right off. Everything looks good?
So let's shut down the engine, and then we'll check the oil to see if it what it looks like, whether it has a lot of water in it or if it looks clean. Well, I'd say we really lucked out.
Oh my God, look
The
at
oil
that.
looks normal. No signs of water or emulsification. What that tells me is that when that the engine didn't run with water in it. The water entered the crankcase after we turned the engine off and before we shut down the seatcock the next morning. That was my mistake. I should have shut down the seatcock immediately after shutting off the engine, but I was tired and didn't think about it. And but it looks good. I'm still going to go ahead and run the engine for a while to help burn off any vapors, water vapors that might be anywhere in the engine, and then we'll do another flush.
Pumping out the oil in this boat is not an easy process. We use a small pump that you stick on the end of a hand drill, and the oil is pumped through a very narrow tube at a very slow rate.
30 minutes later, we've pumped out the oil.
Is it done?
This represents the last two pump outs of the oil, and you can see it's really dark. We've got about 3 gallons of oil here in this container, and there's no traces of water. It's just really pure oil. Not too dirty, actually. It looks pretty decent. But we're going to go and put in some fresh oil again. Just put on a new oil filter. We'll run it from here over to Barra de Navidad a bit, and when we get into Barra, we'll check the oil, and we may do another flush there depending on what the oil looks like. But so far so good. Everything is working well. We've run the engine for about an hour, and the oil looks good. There's no water in the oil, and we're looking forward to starting our cruising again.
So, we have a temporary fix which will get us through the next couple of weeks until we can get to Barra de Navidad, where we have a new oil cooler being shipped. Now, after 2 unplanned weeks in Las Hadas, it's time to set sail again. Next stop, Ensenada Carrizal, which is a rare treat along Mexico's busy Pacific mainland. It's the only isolated, unpopulated spot completely hidden from any signs of civilization, where cruisers can find some peace and quiet, not to mention clear turquoise water, craggy cliffs, and incredible snorkeling among its maze of coral reefs. Be sure to come back for our next video as we share this gorgeous cove with you and continue our journey up Mexico's Gold Coast. If you enjoyed our video, please be sure to click like and to subscribe.